I'm Sarah Jackson, host of Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, a listening experience choreographed to help you elevate your internal communications to the pro level.
It's also about knowing what's in the hearts and minds of my people, and what are they concerned about, and what are the obstacles for them to achieving their goals. It's about how do I recreate those organic experiences to gather staff input without it feeling really corporate and a little bit bureaucratic. But the key for us was taking 5, 10, 20 minutes just to reflect on what worked, what didn't work, and how do we want to pivot to use part of that in the future. In my opinion, the most important thing is to realize that the leaders who are sitting around you don't have the strengths and the qualities that you possess.
Today's episode takes us to the windy city of Chicago. Now, I know we typically feature internal communicators from very large corporations, so we wanted to change it up a bit and talk to an internal communicator from a smaller business. Yes, I've got you small business folks. Our guest today has watched her company scale and grow over the years, and now she is scaling and growing culture and connection among her now remote workforce. Here's the best part. Her ideas can work for any size organization. If you need some new ideas to refresh your remote work playbook, this episode is for you. Let's jump in and meet our guest.
My name is Jessica Schaeffer, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing for LaSalle Network.
Well, give us, for our listeners, kind of a little background about LaSalle Network, how many employees, where you located, kind of level set for us today.
Sure. LaSalle Network is a staffing, recruiting, and culture firm, and we are headquartered in Chicago, although we place people nationwide. So we have about 250 recruiters that currently sit all over the country due to COVID and working from home. And we've been in business for more than 2 decades.
Well, give us a little bit of your personal backstory. I mean, I know I've seen you speak at the Advanced Learning Institute conferences. Give us a little bit of your background in this world and what's piqued your interest, particularly with internal communicators.
I've been really fortunate to have stumbled into internal communications and really, really like it and find that it's a passion of mine. I've worked for LaSalle Network for almost a decade, and this is where I grew up. This is where I learned my skills and how I've been able to apply a lot of what I've learned, in addition to going to external conferences and meeting different folks. But my journey has been helping a small company grow to a mid-sized organization. So when I started at LaSalle, we only had 40 people. And so internal communications was fairly easy and a minimal lift. And today we've got 250 people. And obviously, COVID and the pandemic and working from home has added new layers into the challenges of internal communications. But I've been really, really fortunate to have been able to see how a company can scale their internal communications.
So I know we've all been through the ringer here the last year, and everyone loves to swap stories because I think everyone's story is so unique. Tell us a little bit about your journey from the turbulent year of the last year, because I know we're getting ready to put our running shoes on again and headed into another marathon. But tell us, what was that experience and last year like for you?
So, being in the staffing and recruiting business, we were immediately impacted by the pandemic. So interestingly enough, we were about to take our employees on a trip to Las Vegas to celebrate hitting a goal a week before everything shut down in Chicago. And Vegas, I think, had started shutting down as well. So unfortunately, we had to scrap and postpone our trip and send all of our employees home. And by the end of March and early April, we really started to see the effects on our business because everyone thought, I think, this would be 2 weeks and we'd be home and then we'd be back into the office. And when that started to prove that it would be longer than 2 weeks and maybe we're looking at months, who knew it would go on this long, companies really started to evaluate their hiring. Most companies put a freeze on hiring completely. And so we saw our business drop by 70% in 3 days. I mean, it was terrible. And we knew that if we were going to get through it, we needed to double down and recommit to our people and to our process. And so that's exactly what we did. Our CEO came out early on and said, no matter how bad business gets, we are not going to lay off a single person. I don't care if you are a recruiter, a salesperson in marketing, an administrative staff answering the phones, all of you will have jobs. I am going to stand by it. We've been in business for 22 years and I've never done a layoff through 2 recessions. I'm not doing one now. We later saw the economic impact of the pandemic and all the closures. And so we made sure to communicate to our staff that although business wasn't flowing and we didn't have positions that we were recruiting for because companies had instituted these hiring freezes, we needed to continue to meet candidates. We needed to continue to have a pulse on what's happening in the market and make sure that our activity, our outreach, our phone calls were there and were quite frankly better than they were pre-COVID. Because when business came back, we needed to be ready. And we knew that it would come back at some point. It was just a matter of how long it would be. And so for us, we saw July and August really took a turn and business started booming again. And in the fourth quarter, we had the best quarter ever in the history of the company.
Wow. What a great story. So we stick so close to our listeners. And so every season we ask them, okay, what do you want to hear about, this season? And they sent back 4 or 5 topics, but one of the repeating themes from their feedback was still this remote, um, work. Somebody even asked, does anybody have a return to work playbook? And so at the heart of it, and this was literally taken from one of our listeners, it's they wanted to know, with everything going on, this isn't ending. And some companies now have decided to be, virtual forever and remote forever. And so today I wanted to have you on the show to really talk about tips and learnings and strategies for maintaining culture and connection with your remote workforce. So if you wouldn't mind to maybe give us a peek into your high level remote work strategy, what's working well, what are you struggling with, what are you kind of refining in 2021? I mean, is your company planning on staying remote now, or what's LaSalle thinking?
Yeah, so we've had some successes and we've had some failures and some things that fall in between. And quite frankly, it's still a work in progress because what worked 6 months ago might be stale and not work now. So we're continuing to refine it, but we do plan to bring our staff back in the office probably once the vaccine is readily available and distributed, because it just doesn't make sense right now to try to bring people back. For us, it doesn't make sense right now to try to bring people back before then. The risks outweigh the benefits. But communication, and quite frankly, over communication, has been the name of the game for us. So at the start of COVID, when we first sent our staff home, we had daily town halls every single day, 8:30 a.m. Our CEO was there and answered the bell, and sometimes it was lighthearted and goofy because he thought people needed a laugh, and sometimes it was a kick in the butt because our activity and the metrics weren't there, and other times it was empathy and talking about what's happening in the world and what might be happening in people's lives and in their brains and what's going on. And we did those daily town halls probably for 6 months. Every single day our CEO was on the horn. And we're big proponents of video. So there's so many great tools and softwares out there. But we mandated early on that employees have their video on. If they could, if it was safe, if they felt comfortable, we asked that everybody turn their video on to help with those connection points. It's easier to see people smiling and laughing and feeding off their energy when you can see their faces, especially when everybody's on mute. It's so tough to feed off of other people's energies. And then it helps create the synergy we had in the office, those connection points, the banter, the laughter, the things that we all fed off of from our open floor plan. Another thing that we highly encourage our staff to do in smaller meetings, not in those big company-wide town halls, but in smaller meetings, is take yourself off mute. I don't know if you felt this, Sarah, or if other leaders that you've had on the podcast have talked about this, but for some reason, there is a barrier when you are on a video call on mute. People are less likely to speak up, to share ideas, to poke holes, to just banter the way that they normally would. And so we really encourage people, take away that barrier for yourself. It's okay if you've got kids crying or dogs barking or all the things that are happening in your home. We're all home, and so we know that those things are happening, and it's okay. But we want you to contribute. We want ideas to flow. We want you to be able to be creative. So when you can, take yourself off mute.
That is such a good tip. And I think the on camera is such a good tip because everyone was just thrust into, this virtual technology, and it feels like those were details, I think, that sort of got unearthed, that companies now need to set expectations. Is it going to be on camera, or is it okay to not be on camera? So I think those are such key tips as you're going into 2021 and maybe have tested it, just people turn off their cameras, but now you might want to change it and say, I think we need to strongly recommend that people turn on their cameras. I think that those are such good tips in terms of details of things. Anything else that you're thinking about refining heading into 2021 with your high level remote strategy?
The biggest thing that I continue to revisit for 2021 is being able to gather our employees' input, because I'm not going to be an effective internal communications professional if I don't have a pulse on the people. Yes, it is absolutely about our leadership and their vision and communicating our goals and the path forward and how we're going to achieve those goals. But it's also about knowing what's in the hearts and minds of my people, and what are they concerned about, and what are the obstacles for them to achieving their goals. And so before, when you had the water cooler chats and you could visit all of the offices and talk to people, it's about how do I recreate those organic experiences to gather staff input without it feeling really corporate and a little bit bureaucratic, because we do regular surveys and gather staff feedback that way. But sometimes those don't feel as natural or as genuine. And quite frankly, people might not be as honest as if they were talking to somebody while grabbing a beer after work. And so for me, I've really been focused on how do I keep a pulse on our people and make sure that we're focused on what matters to them.
And so, what or do you have any quick tips? How are you doing that? Is it, hey, let's hop on a quick call? I mean, when you're past, 200 people, how do you do that? I mean, might be considered a small business, but still, that's a lot of people to get a pulse on.
Absolutely. And there's a number of ways that we've done it. Early on, all of our executive leaders were tasked with talking to people every day. So they all had a goal to call on video 10 employees each day. So if we've got 6 executive leaders, 60 people would get touched on a good day. Whether they could, feasibly do that or not with their schedule was up to them. But it could be 5 minutes, it could be 10 minutes, but the exposure to the leader was great for them. It helps with the retention tool, it helps them feel more comfortable with those leaders, and it also allows our leaders to get insight into what's going on in their lives, but also what might be pertinent to them for the business. So that was part one. Part two is we started hosting town halls quarterly. So we do these daily town halls, which are really a one-way dialogue, our CEO giving updates and talking to our staff. But we wanted to make sure we were getting input from them about what they wanted to hear. What questions or concerns do they have that our CEO could address during our quarterly company-wide meetings? And so we solicited input that way. And actually, Sarah, I listened to the Paycor podcast recently, and it was interesting. I learned something from that podcast that I wouldn't have taken away from my own interactions, because they said they do these regular surveys, and initially they received an overwhelming amount of responses, so many questions, so many concerns that staff had. And as they continued to do them and refine their plan, they had fewer and fewer questions that were submitted. And it gave me pause, and I realized we had the same thing. We got better as well because we knew the messages that people were concerned about, and we were able to communicate those and do that regularly.
So if you had, a friend of yours that was in internal comms just getting started, again with this new normal, is there, in addition to, all the great tips that you've given, is there an easy structure you've seen? I mean, everyone's asking, does anybody have a remote playbook or a formula of sorts to help our audience kind of get organized into 21? I guess, has anyone come up with a really good remote process? Can you speak to that a little bit?
I believe every process will be different based on your culture and your people and what they need. So for us, our remote playbook was maintain as much structure and normalcy as possible. So we're going to keep doing our company wide meetings, but we're doing them virtually. We're going to keep doing the after hours, happy hours, culture building activities, piano bars, ice cream socials, workouts, that type of thing. We're going to keep doing those because that's true to who we are. And it didn't feel forced, and our staff wanted their connection point. The other thing that we tried to do is make sure that our leaders were extremely visible. We do only have 250 people, so it's easier for our leaders to be more ingrained in the culture. They used to be at our offices walking the floors every single day. So we had to make sure that they were still as visible remote as they were in office. And that meant leading town halls, leading company wide meetings, doing the individual outreach to employees. That was really key. And then the last piece, which is, what I just talked about a little bit, was just making sure that we were continuing to solicit employee input, whether it's those casual conversations, anonymous surveys, or what have you. We had to make sure we knew what was going on with our people.
The Internal Comms Pro Collective is proudly supported by Circle Broadcast. Now, I know we all have our own guidelines and updates for returning to the office, but whether you're communicating the new normal with your now permanently virtual workforce, let your employees have the latest and greatest info at their fingertips. With the Broadcast Suite, communicators can send updates to whatever channels your employees prefer wherever they are. And if something's changed, you don't have to dig through a dozen channels to correct it. To learn more about creating a simplified cross-channel distribution experience, visit circle.com/ICP. That's CERKL.com/ICP. Now, in this next part, Jessica warns us of moving too fast with our communication, and she talks about how she prioritizes her relationships with leaders. And you don't want to miss her tips on how to maintain culture, connection, and camaraderie in a remote world. Yes, can you say remote baby shower? Now let's dive back in. Yeah, I think the process of even putting out a survey, there's so much power, in that. Well, these are fantastic ideas. I know when we talk to guests, they always, though, have some sort of war story or, oh my gosh, we had this blunder. Are there any mistakes that you made that you would be allowed to share? Because I know the greatest learnings, come from some of our failures. Anything that you can think of, like, oh, we did this one thing and it taught us this really key lesson going into 2021?
So many, honestly. And I think that if everyone's being honest with themselves, everything was new. And so how could we not make a ton of mistakes on the way to finding something that is better than it was? And so there's a couple key ones that stand out to me as I reflect on the year. And one of the first ones was defaulting to quick communication as opposed to potentially pausing and waiting to provide more thorough communication. And so not only do we have our 250 employees, we also have 1,000 plus temporary employees that work in the field for us. So it's not just about our internal staff, it's also about the folks who are working in the field. And so really early on, when Chicago shut down and when many of our client companies were closing and sending their temporary workforce home, we tried to quickly get communication out to our internal and our temporary employees working in the field. And that ended up just causing a little bit of chaos, a little bit of confusion. People were scared. It was already a scary time. And so we could have paused our communication and waited a couple of hours, maybe a day, and alleviated some of that. So we quickly learned from that mistake and got better as we went on.
Hmm. Well, and I think from on the mistake front, it feels because there was so much new learning. It sounds like many of our guests, with communicators, we're always so polished, and it was a growth, I think, moment for a lot of them to get comfortable with this is a mess and we keep tripping up on ourselves. And this is almost sort of how entrepreneurs operate, a lot of little tests. It feels messy, it feels chaotic. It felt like they had to get okay with that because there was, so many new things to do and to learn and to execute. And it felt like leadership um, could meet them halfway on that. And it sort of feels like it sparked almost this new energizing, almost experimental kind of lab in a lot of these departments. Did you find that too?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very fortunate that we have executive buy-in and they focus on internal communications as well as external, obviously. But they were constantly good with being in a state of beta. Let's try this, let's try that, and learning from it, but making sure we were doing it really, really quickly, faster than probably we've ever done it before, which is always a challenge. And when you're moving quickly, of course, you're going to make mistakes. But the key for us was taking 5, 10, 20 minutes just to reflect on what worked, what didn't work, and how do we want to pivot to use part of that in the future.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I've heard is that whether you were seen as this or not, COVID really thrust our audience into this more visible leadership role. I even had one internal communicator say they've even got me in these meetings on what kind of plexiglass we should order. So when people are now having an awareness, like, all right, I am here, whether I asked to be here or not, this infamous seat at the table kind of moment. What would you say is the most important thing that we need to think about while doing that work and now being at that leadership table?
In my opinion, the most important thing is to realize that the leaders who are sitting around you don't have the strengths and the qualities that you possess. And so a lot of times, internal comms is responsible for equipping other people with the messages that they need to share or distributing the messages that need to be shared. But realize that not everybody is as good as it as you are. Not everyone is comfortable speaking publicly. Not everybody is comfortable with written communication. Every single leader that you're going to work with that is sitting around the table talking about plexiglass or the markers on the floor for where people can stand or whatever it may be, they don't all have the attributes that you do. Otherwise, they'd be in your role. And so you have to meet each leader where they're at and know what they're comfortable with and talk to them. What are you comfortable with? What are you confident in? How can I best support you in this? And then take good notes about the messages that they want relayed and make sure that you're supplying people with what they need.
Hmm. Well, and I think the other thing, when they talk about being at the leadership table now, is it was always hard for them to get budget back in the old days, kind of being in this subordinated role. Are you finding that it's easier now to get the tools and the tech that you need, or are you still having to make that business case?
Probably a silver lining of COVID is that budgets haven't been fully utilized for many teams. So for example, we do a decent amount of events and we were supposed to take that trip to Las Vegas that I told you about and we didn't. And so all that money came back into my budget. And so I had additional resources to work from, but quite frankly, it's been a fairly easy lift because our leaders are bought in And because we have a lot of the technology that is extremely functional for us. We use Zoom, we use Microsoft Teams, we use the Office Suite and SharePoint and OneDrive. So we have a lot of tools already at our fingertips, and we haven't had to reinvest in something new just yet.
Yeah. Well, and I know again in hearing you speak, it sounds like you're close to leadership. You're constantly keeping them updated on your successes. When internal communicators are headed into 2021, what might be, a blind spot that they might be missing going into this, next marathon?
I know that I keep coming back to this, but honestly, I can't stress how important it is having a pulse on your people. Whether you have 1,000, 2,000, 20,000 employees, they are at the heart of what you do and how your organization achieves its goals. And so if your people are concerned or worried, anxious about returning to the office, anxious about having kids at home and e learning. There's a million distractions that are happening right now. And if we can help alleviate the work side distractions and help provide some additional resources for the personal side distractions, our people are going to be better equipped to do their jobs. And they're going to be happier, quite frankly, working for you. And so when you don't have those in person interactions and those coffee chats and drinks and what have you have to find ways to build those in and make sure you have a pulse on your people.
That's so good. That is so good. And I love how you said it changes so often, with our emotions. We're humans. So we might be excited about something one day and get great engagement on this virtual town hall, but now it doesn't work anymore. So I think that I heard that a lot too from our guests saying, what worked, 4 weeks ago doesn't seem like it's working anymore. Are you finding that as well?
Absolutely. And the other piece of that is a lot of times we're doing things with our own frame of reference because what I need one day could be entirely different than somebody who sits in a different office than I do. And that we could fluctuate by the hour, by the day, by the minute. I mean, really, emotions are just constantly changing and how people are feeling about remote work, about their fulfillment with their job, about exposure to leadership, about training and development, things that we all know are really important to employee engagement will fluctuate so much differently. And so you can't think about it with your lens, which is why you have to make sure you really have a pulse on the people.
Hmm. Well, and besides that, is there anything else again that you can point to internal communicators that they can do right now to take their remote work strategy to the next level? So I've got a pulse on my people. Is there any other um, you know points that you can shine light in on things that you've done, not only to elevate, their strategy, but to continue to elevate their status within the company so that they can be seen, as that leader?
One of the best ways to elevate your status and quickly is to build relationships with the leaders. And so, if you have relationships with C level executives, senior vice presidents, directors, managers, what have you, they're going to give you insight. They're going to trust you. They're going to be able to talk to you about their goals and the obstacles that come with those goals. And so, you really have to make inroads, which, quite frankly, is really difficult sitting in your bedroom or your family room or your living room, wherever you're working from. It's so much easier in the office when you could say, "Hey, can I just go grab a coffee with you?" But you have to find ways to work with those leaders. And the first way is proving yourself, delivering for them on something that they asked you to do. That's the first step to building a relationship. And then from there, elevate it, take it to the next level. What do you know about them personally? What do you know about them professionally? What are their goals? What are they trying to achieve? And how can you help support that?
So how would that play out? Is that a simple email, or, if you are, have Slack or something like that, is that, me reaching out to them saying, "Hey, I know we did this," maybe remind them of a deliverable that totally exceeded their expectation, and then ask for, another quick meeting to continue to be able to provide value? Like, how does that sound and look like? I want to put a little polish on this.
Definitely. ways that I've done it that has proven successful is reaching out directly to those leaders and asking for a 15 to 20-minute meeting. I will do it whatever time of day you tell me. You're a morning person, you want to meet at 6 a.m.? Great. I'll make sure my coffee's ready and I will be ready to go. You're an evening person, you want to do it over a glass of wine? I'll be there anytime in between. You tell me what works for your schedule because I want to know how I can better support you and help you achieve your goals. Nobody's going to turn down that kind of meeting. When you're saying, I am available around the clock, you tell me what works for you, you are busier than I am, and I want to make sure you achieve your goals so you can make more money or you can get promoted or whatever it may be. But that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, that's so good. So think back to your younger self. What warning or lesson would you give? I ask this to every guest. What warning or lesson would you give about working in the world of internal communications, particularly during a global pandemic? If you could go back, what would you tell yourself?
That is a really good question. And I know I keep coming back to a similar theme and maybe this is just I'm beating the drum, but you have to have relationships. For me, internal communications comes down to having relationships with key stakeholders, whether that's leaders or staff level folks or anyone in between. You have to build relationships. And the best way to build relationships is to deliver on the work and, quite frankly, deliver faster, sooner, or a better work product than they had been expecting to really prove your worth and then continue to build those relationships over time because it's so easy to sit in our homes and get sucked into our schedule. We have a million and one things on the to-do list, and quite frankly, there's a lot that probably gets pushed every single day. And so how do we make sure that we're building in time and connection points with people to make sure, again, what's on the hearts and minds of our leaders and our people so we can make sure we're addressing those things.
That's so good. It's such a good tip to say pause and stop and make sure you're making time for those types of strategic conversations. I love that. All right, best idea you executed. What are you most proud of when you look back in 2020?
Gosh, that's a good question. It's funny, I think a lot of us tend to reflect more on what went wrong than what went well. We're gluttons for punishment.
Yes.
What I'm most proud of as I look back on 2020 is the way we've been able to maintain our culture. Because for us, culture has always been a priority before it was even a buzzword 10, 12 years ago. And, from an outside perspective, we've really been validated, having been recognized as a best place to work by Glassdoor and Inc. magazine and Fortune magazine and all these incredible publications. And we were really concerned about how do we maintain culture and connection and camaraderie when we were 100% in office. We didn't have a work from home policy. We didn't really have remote workers. Maybe we had 5 people who worked remotely. And so we were not equipped for this. We were not set up for this. And that's probably what I'm most proud of is we were able to build in those connection points, whether again, we were, the very first week we went remote before it probably hit mainstream media, we had a happy hour with our staff and we brought in a piano player to do a piano bar and we did workout classes and some things soared and some things tanked and you learned from that and you improved. Okay, sunrise morning yoga at 7 a.m. is not our staff's cup of tea. Okay, let's find something else that works. But we were really able to build in those points. And one of the coolest things was in the summer when it got a little bit warmer, we hosted outdoor activities where people could be spaced apart and they could wear masks and they could come and mingle with one another and really find what they were missing in their work from home setups. And so we did, our CEO grilled hot dogs and we did a drive-by hot dog drop-off, which was really fun. And we're actually doing one coming up We purchased holiday gifts for our staff, and we're going to have a food truck come and hand out hot chocolate and hot cider, and people can pick up their gifts 100% outside. Wear your mask. If you don't want to come, do not feel like you have to. We will mail your gift. But we've been able to do some really cool things that we wouldn't have tried before.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to kind of summarize as we're trying to provide a framework here. This is, my tactical brain trying to help some of our listeners out. So it sounds like obviously this all starts with the relationships and understanding what is key to the stakeholders and leadership, and then aligning that at the same time with having a pulse on the employees. And then from there, depending on how people are feeling, are you setting kind of monthly messages and events based on the alignment of those two ideas?
That's absolutely right, Sarah. And I have a communications plan that my executive leadership team has seen and has bought into for 2021. And we know that things are going to pivot and change, but that's exactly right. Kind of taking the best of both worlds. What do the leaders want? What are they focused on? What are their goals? And meeting that and marrying it with what's on people's minds. What might be obstacles to achieving those goals? How can we make sure our people are feeling fulfilled and at the same time really connected, especially as we enter, February, March, and finish up January? We were really concerned about the first quarter of the year. It is bleak and dark and dreary in Chicago in the winter. And so how do we make sure, while our business typically takes a dip this time of year, how do we make sure that the weather coupled with lower business activity doesn't impact our people? And so we really do have it planned out. What are the events? What are the touch points? What are we communicating and when? We're regularly giving updates about return to the office. Even if the update is we have no update, we're going to keep telling you once a month where we're at and if you need to be prepared for anything. And same thing with the vaccine. A lot of employers are considering mandating it. And so our job right now is just to educate our people on what's happening with the vaccine, because we want them to feel comfortable with it. So you're exactly right, Sarah. We've got kind of a marrying of the two groups of people that helped create the communications plan.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. So last question, because it's gray here in Cincinnati too. And any, creative, fun ideas that you're going to try in 2021? I know you talked about the cider and the gifts. Anything that, you're going to be doing to help maintain that connection that you're excited to test out?
Virtual baby showers for a couple staff who are giving birth soon, some virtual wedding showers. We're going to host a big March Madness party and do a bracket challenge. And, pending the weather being a little bit warmer than 20 degrees in Chicago, we might do an outdoor hot dog cookout. We've talked about renting out a drive-in movie theater and hosting that one Friday evening for people. So there's a lot of ideas percolating that we're trying to just think of what might appeal. And it won't appeal to everybody, but if it appeals to, 30, 40, 50% of our population, that's a win.
That's amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing, your experience with us and giving us some practical tips, some high level tips. We all like to compare what the other's doing. So I appreciate you being open to sharing, what you've got going on in your world. And we'll be sure to follow up with you on those events and how they all turned out.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Well, there you have it, folks. Lots of ideas on how you can maintain culture and connection among your remote workforce. Now, we'll put all these ideas in a handy guide that you can access at internalcommspro.com/show notes. Stay with us next week as our journey to uplevel your internal communications to pro level continues.
Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, is produced by the Internal Comms Pro Collective. To learn more, visit www.internalcommspro.com.